I've also spoken to security leaders recently as well, who I'm like, hey, this is what we're hearing on the news. This is what we're seeing in the hype cycles. Is this actually a problem? And yeah, I have spoken to them and specifically tell me service account is a problem. Like service account, how do we go about managing with just explosion of this? How do we get really good visibility and a good grasp of this? And that's, so there is a problem around, and I think incumbent solutions are not quite able to solve for it. And I think that's why there's almost a knack for who's going to help us solve this.
Welcome to a new episode of All Aboard, the show where we have real conversations with IT and security practitioners. No fluff, no talking points, just straight talk from experts and advice for tackling the toughest problems facing cloud-forward companies today. I'm your host, Alex Bowie, CEO and co-founder of Conductor One. Welcome back to the All Aboard podcast. This week, we've got another great conversation recorded live during the Black Hat Conference in Las Vegas in August. In Las Vegas, I got the chance to sit down with Francis Odum, who runs the Software Analyst, a cybersecurity research platform. Francis is a researcher and analyst with a deep and nuanced understanding of the cybersecurity space. His large audience of investors, builders, and practitioners look to him for advice about the industry as a whole and what solutions and technologies they should be paying attention to. Together, Francis and I dug into two related topics on everyone's mind at Black Hat: non-human identity, otherwise known as NHI, and AI. We talked about what's hype, what's real, and how the industry is responding to new threats and using those new technologies to address them. Let's get into it.
Francis,
hi, Alex.
Thanks for joining the All Aboard podcast from beautiful Las Vegas.
Love it. It's amazing. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's an awesome setup. I did get the pro tip earlier, though, on the last interview I did, that we should do it at night next time, so that the lights.
Yes, totally agree.
I think that'd be pretty sweet. That's a definitely pro move. So, how long you been in Vegas for? You're a soldier. You did 7 days.
Pretty much, yes. I have done 7 days. Yeah, pretty much been here since Saturday. Just pretty much enjoying the week. As I was telling you early on, I mean, we only, for cybersecurity professionals in the industry, we only get 2 or 3 of these every year where we really get to see each other, put a face to ourselves, and just get away from the Zooms, right? Totally. And just have that real conversation, the handshakes. There's really nothing like this, quite frankly.
Yeah. I was talking about that earlier too. I feel like the ground game at like RSA and Black Hat, and just the opportunity to see everybody that you walk through the halls, and if you've been in security for more than a minute, like
absolutely
old friends, bumping people.
Absolutely. No, it's that's the best part of this. Really, that's the best part of this. And your partners, your business partners, professionals, everyone you get to really talk to, and people you don't see, and you have people also coming up to you, right? Actually, I saw you in the hallway, and I'm like, actually, this is our first time we're actually meeting in person. Actually,
That's right.
This is actually our first time meeting in person. But I saw you in the hallway, I'm like, that guy looks familiar. We've had a couple calls.
That guy looks really dashing. I feel like I've seen that dude before. Yeah, awesome. So let's jump in and talk all things cybersecurity. Well, actually, and maybe tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do, because you're a cybersecurity analyst.
Yeah,
right?
correct.
Researcher.
Yeah, so Francis, I pretty much own the Software Analyst. It's my cybersecurity research platform. Some people call me a mini Gartner, a mini Forrester, but pretty much what I do is I have a following of about 60,000 across all my platforms, security professionals, investors, operators, and pretty much I share insights, market, industry reports, such as similar things that I've done on identity, I've done things in the SOC, I've done things on the endpoint, cloud security, and a number of different categories. And and as I was telling you early on, identity has actually been my conversation. Like,
let's go there. Let's do it. I was gonna wait, but man, if you give me the opportunity to talk about identity and security, we're gonna dive right in. I mean, what are you seeing? Like, what's interesting right now for you in identity and security?
Yeah, I was just mentioning this early on. Like, people are actually talking about Conductor. Like, people are saying they're coming after Conductor.
Let's go. Let's go.
Like,
I got a target on my back, and like we're just getting started.
Literally, it's pretty amazing to see. Actually, it's pretty amazing that you guys have actually created. Like, when people are trying to describe what is the next gen of SailPoint, or I talk to investors who are like, we're looking for the next hot thing there, but people always just that reference. But Conductor One, you mean Conductor One and the like, and I'm like, that's very impressive of what you guys.
I just want to say for the audience, I did not pay Francis to do this interview.
No, 100%. Like, no, I'm a researcher.
Let's go.
I'm a researcher. I speak to a lot of investors. I recently to many founders. So a lot of the folks mentioning your names are actually, I help founders. So there are new founders coming out of Israel and the like who are trying to tackle the space. And they see the big budgets that are being used, the implementation costs and IGA.
Totally.
And these guys are like, we want a piece of that pie. And so whenever they're trying to brainstorm the market, they're like, oh, we want to be like, oh, we're trying to go after the next gen likes of Conductor One and the like. So that's a lot of what I do and what I've been hearing a lot these days.
Yeah. So identity, it feels like it's happening. I mean, one thing that jumped out a lot at RSA obviously was non-human identity. Are you following that space? Like, I feel like everyone's talking about it.
I can't tell you how many times I've talked about it, like literally multiple times. I have conversations with investors, I have conversations with founders. It's all my trauma idea. I can't tell you how many times it keeps popping up.
The hype cycle is peak. It's peak hype cycle. Well, I mean, in your perspective, do CISOs care a lot about it, or are they more trying to figure out, like, is this actually a risk? Because I do see that a lot with all security trends. I mean, I have a perspective, obviously, in the space, but there's kind of like a new surface area, or there's a question or a concern about something that could be an issue, and it gets a lot of energy, but then you kind of figure out what matters and doesn't there, and like, what are you hearing from like practitioners and leaders in the security space?
100%. I really like the way you break that out, because I think there are two different ways of actually thinking about the whole theme of non-human identity. I think one, there's definitely a hype cycle. There's definitely this renowned excitement. A number of companies, like obviously 2 companies just came out last week, literally came out of announced they're like, we're going after this market. So on one phase, there's a lot of excitement and buzz, and obviously that's been driven a lot of the investors and the funding. But generally, when we think about non-human identity, I don't think this is a new problem. I think you talk to security leaders, CISOs, and they'll always tell you this has always been an issue. But I've also spoken to security leaders recently as well, where I'm like, hey, this is what we're hearing on the news, this is what we're seeing in the hype cycles, is this actually a problem? And I have spoken to them, and specifically tell me service account is a problem. Like service account, how do we go about managing with just explosion of this? How do we get really good visibility and a good grasp of this? And that's, so there is a problem around, and I think incumbent solutions are not quite able to solve for it. And I think that's why there's almost a knack for who's going to help us solve this. And I think that just morphed into this whole thing of, okay, now we need a whole new bunch of solutions and providers coming. But it is a problem. And I think there's still also a question of, I don't think it's being solved properly right now in the enterprise. And the question is, yes, who's going to do that and do well?
I mean, it's so interesting that you said, it's not, in many ways, it's not a new problem. Like, we've had OAuth tokens and API keys and secrets and service accounts for forever.
Absolutely.
But it seems like it's getting more energy now. I mean, is there anything in your mind that's actually driven, besides just kind of having a lot of startups and vendors and a lot of capital put into the space? Is there anything in particular you think that is driving like the awareness around it, or?
I think obviously, I think AI played a little bit of a role. I think now there's a rise of bots, and obviously like there's just a lot more automated solutions that companies are running and spinning across their cloud and SaaS environments. And I think, and together with this whole AI buzz and the possibilities of AI agents and the likes, I think that's just almost renowned, like, oh, hey, we need to fix this problem. Or like
we have a bot that basically operates like a human with the same access privilege, but it's a
how do we go about managing that? Exactly. And I think, so companies are, I think that's probably what brought about this renaissance in a mini way. Even though most enterprises will tell you, I've spoken to enterprises, I'm like, hey, how many bots do you have running, or AI agents talking to each other? And quite frankly, they will tell you, hey, it's still early. We don't have like fully all running our production environments. It's still very early. But I think something about AI is just bringing up that whole conversation. Right. And I think we've also seen a few number of things in the headlines that maybe some people have been able to like map out, like, hey, if you really had good NHI protocols, the solutions, you might have prevented this. But yeah. One thing that you said that kind of stuck with me is the, we've always had service accounts. I think, I don't know if it's frustrating or fascinating, but it feels like security is just
always reinventing itself to solve the same problems.
Exactly. Yes.
Like forever.
Yes.
What's your take on that? I mean, because we've had service accounts for forever, and I guess there's just been different solutions and ways of managing those. And
honestly, I can't necessarily, I don't really know why, for a reason, but you're absolutely correct. I think that's a very good point you mentioned. Cybersecurity is all about solving the same problems, but maybe in a new architecture, in a new different domain. Because I really think about IGA. I mean, we could talk about IGA whenever, but when I think about IGA, the same problems that were previously that some microsystems, Oracle systems, and then SailPoint came in and brought in a different way of thinking about the same problem. And then obviously you guys are trying to do the same thing. But when you think about it, it's still fundamentally user access provisioning.
Right.
Like it's life cycle, it's access. Like those things are still fundamental, but it's just the dynamics. Like we're dealing with SaaS environments now.
Right. And where I was pushing on that a little bit too, because I do think actually that SaaS has shifted a little bit of the problem and the scope of the problem there, because you have these delegated application owners, and you have, within the context of a SaaS application, the ability for an end user to authorize access to their data to another platform. You have those abilities for like the human to kind of take security and IT completely out of the loop and go do things in these applications that might expose data. And that feels new. That feels like we don't know what's going on here, and we don't know what service accounts people have created.
Absolutely.
I'm not the application owner for Salesforce. I don't know what's going on in it.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think it's part of the same reason why people are like, we just need a better handle. We need a better grasp around NHI. Like, how do we go about solving this solution? And yeah, right now, it'd be very interesting to see who's best positioned to do that. Yeah. Obviously, different types of vendors are coming at it from, you have the authentication and the workload guys like your Ambits of the world. And then obviously you have this whole new generation more on the authorization layer. So it's very interesting. I'm working on a report actually next month. Cool. Specifically on NHI service accounts. And so I'm going to be spending a little bit more time, especially early next month, on this topic. So probably will have more to share on that. But nice. It was something that evolved from we're doing this identity governance piece, and then we just coming to hear that it was popping up.
Yep.
And so yeah, very interesting.
And then in your mind, is that really closely tied into like a traditional governance use cases? And
this is the next big question. This is now the really big question. And I had this conversation with a few folks yesterday. I think this is a multi-million-dollar question. And so I had maybe two different ways to approach it, or different opinions. I think number one, I spoke to a CISO about this. I actually asked him, he was also wanting to roll out some type of governance solution. And he was telling me about NHI as a still service account specifically, especially on, they have a hybrid environment, on-prem versus cloud. And it was just like, this is really a problem, and how do we go about managing that? And I asked him, service account, it's a problem for you, but what kind of solution are you looking to get? Are you going to buy a brand new vendor like Oasis or Ashrix of the world, or one of those guys? Or would you be wanting it from your existing vendors? And he actually said, no, I want this from my existing vendors. And whether that's exactly, whether that's whether that's your next gen PAM, if they're using some CyberArk or whatever, or some governance platform, like they need it from that angle of things. And he actually told me, I don't think I'm going to get another point solution. And so obviously I've had the same conversation with people. And I think even some of the founders, I've spoken to a lot of the founders actually on NHI, pretty much most of them. And they also are not very confident this could be a standalone category over the long term. So I think over the long term, governance platforms like Connect and One will be well positioned to subsume that part, because at the end of the day, you guys are seeing this out. You guys are helping enforce all this policy. You guys are preventing shadow stuff. There's no reason why you guys couldn't latch that on. So I think this, no, quite frankly, I do think it is. But I think I've also heard that it's a very complex problem. The visibility of this service account, especially how much they explode across APIs and tokens, and it's a very difficult problem. So I know even though the governance platform might be really good to take care of that, it's going to be, I think it's going to be quite similar. I don't think it's going to be as easy.
Yeah,
so
that's super fair. One of the things you just said, I think it dovetails kind of perfectly with some things that have been happening in the news, is you mentioned buying another point solution, platformization, the the CrowdStrike blue screen of death issue that happened with a bad update to the CrowdStrike agent running. I think there's a little bit of a question here around these broad security platforms. I'm not trying to pick on CrowdStrike specifically, but just making a point broadly about platforms. You end up putting a lot of eggs kind of in a basket when you've got these broad platforms. And I think the world saw through that just how dependent on these platforms, like really everything is. Like Delta, like everything. Yeah, what's your thought on, I guess, point solutions versus like platformization? And do you think that things like the CrowdStrike issue that happened, is that going to actually push people back a little bit more towards point solutions and kind of separating maybe some of the different pieces of their security stack out?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and I think it's still the $1 million question everyone's really trying to figure out. But I think definitely, I think a lot of people would agree with the fact that, and even security leaders would agree with the fact that, like, I think the lesson from Delta Airlines and CrowdStrike really just shows the importance of redundancy and really how not to put your eggs in one basket, or at least minimizing your risk and thinking about risk in the case of one vendor actually falters, or one vendor has actually been broken through, right? And like if your former employer, like that unfortunately with what happened today, I think but people, it was probably not as massive as what happened with CrowdStrike. I think this is just way bigger. So I think in terms of platform versus vendor consolidation, just in terms of what I hear from CISOs and security leaders that I speak to, I think different parts of the security architecture would lean towards more of a platform approach, and specific types of areas would lean more towards a best-of-breed approach. So more on your platforms might be things like when you think of your network infrastructure, whereby you really need a lot of things connected and really well closed. You don't want to have multiple fragmented components to it. And I think that's why in the network space, we're seeing SASE and some of the work we've done there. I think those types of solutions lead to more of a platform approach. Meanwhile, newer problems, like let's just say AI agents do actually become a really big problem, and lots of companies have automated solutions. Like maybe there might be a space for NHI point solution best to breed that a legacy vendor might not solve as well, or new areas like OPSEC. I follow the software supply chains. So newer emerging threats that we haven't really seen before are usually more prone to the best of breed, from what I've heard from CISOs.
Makes sense.
And then a lot of major platforms are the platform. But in identity specifically, this is something I'm still trying to crack, is what's going to be that platform? What's going to be that? Because identity customer identity is so different. Authentication is so different. Governance is so different.
We've talked about this. My mental model.
I want to get your thoughts. Yeah.
Well, my mental model is that, if you think about identity, there's like at least probably 3 dimensions. There's the types of identities you're talking about, whether that's humans or contractors or customers. There's kind of like your different resource types. So you got cloud, you got infrastructure, you got on-prem, and then you've got like your use cases as maybe a 3rd dimension there, from access reviews, permission management, things like. And you can any particular startup can pick any dimension of that three-legged or 3-sided cube and say, I'm going to go start a best of breed product in that thing.
Absolutely.
Whether or not that stays standalone kind of product and has enough legs to run with that is like to be determined. I think in a lot of cases.
It's going to be very interesting. Literally the meeting I just had before this, and I maybe want to get your thoughts on this because I don't have too much of an opinion, but it's more around the identity access for RAG and LLM type applications and how you manage access rights for who could see what type of data. I just literally had that pitch right before I just came right to this, and this founder was just telling me, and this investor was just telling me about this whole new idea, and I'm like, okay, I need to think about this, but I don't know if you guys have any thought, because I think about you guys and I'm like, why not you guys have, eventually.
Yeah, and that's why it's I don't know, the devil's a little bit in the details. Like I think you kind of have to pull through. Well, let me take a step back. I tend to think a lot about who's our buyer and user, and making sure that we're ICP aligned with the customer. So I want to solve a bunch of problems in identity and security for the CISO, for the director of InfoSec, for like that team specifically. So I think one of the first questions I would want to understand, at least in that particular context, is like, who owns that problem? Is that a developer problem? Who owns like the security and kind of the permission management? Because that's really like an application, like that's like an AppSec problem to a degree. Or is that actually like a security like director of InfoSec?
Absolutely.
InfoSec. So I think the ICP in a lot of ways is revealing if you kind of explore that.
Yeah.
And then if it is ICP aligned, I think you can try to sort of figure out where it fits in the product stack. And like, okay, is this the same use case, but you're just swapping a resource type? Like instead of a human, it's a robot,
correct,
which is effectively a service account,
right?
Or is it something else? So that's probably like the mental model I would use, but I don't know enough about.
And you know as well, I need to delve in. Like as you know, there's so much of the identity. There's so much of this new infrastructure stuff that's just evolving. But yeah, that was just one. Because when this guy mentioned, it's like, I started thinking about you guys and already at governance. And you guys have seen what's happening in the application layer, and I'm like, why not them? But anyways, I need to delve more. So I wouldn't know so much about that.
I mean, so many security problems. Like, oh, it sounds like this. Like,
I know, right?
It's like, Mikey, I don't know. It's hard to tell. And we talked a lot about identity, but like your purview is broader. You do research on the cybersecurity space broadly. What's interesting? Like, what did you see at Black Hat that was interesting?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Obviously,
AI,
so much. Obviously, that one's always a big one. Security for AI, like how do we secure LLM apps and whatnot, is a big one. I think other adjacent areas, obviously, are areas of the application security layer. I think parts of that component could be like areas more like application security, posture management is a big theme that we're hearing about. There's so many different categories I track. Also following some companies currently now within the SOC space as well, and like automation. So how do we automate a lot of the alerts that many teams are dealing with, right? Like the alert fatigue continues to be a big problem. The cost of managing SIMs, and how do we develop and use AI to solve many of those solutions? I think thematic conversations, but a lot of it is just how do we use AI to solve lots of these existing problems we've had in security as an underlying theme.
So how big do you think? I feel like we're just getting to the point where the sparkle has sort of worn off a little bit on AI, and people are like taking a harder look at it and saying like, okay, what can we actually do with this?
True.
Both from how do you use it in your products to solve problems, and then obviously from a security perspective, what does it mean to actually provide security around these AI models and bots? So in your mind, like, what is the future of not necessarily securing AI within the organization, but more from a product perspective? Like, are we just getting started, or like, is there anything interesting that you're seeing people doing there with LLMs and their products? And
honestly, I mean, for the most part, I think many companies are just, how do we use this to optimize and augment existing processes that we have internally? I think that's just been one big one, is like, and this takes a role, whether it's customer service, whether it's chatbots, whether you're dealing with like improving metrics internally, or like aggregating and summarizing information at some level, or some big high level, big picture level. It's all about how do we use AI to augment and make things faster, improving and significant. And I think that's really where the opportunity is. And even for security as well, it's the same way. And I think most companies and products need to think about is how do we use that? And honestly, how do you do that in such a way that you still are not calling yourself AI, but the customer actually does experience that huge benefit? I think that's what people actually now, investors and CISOs, are challenging some of their founders and companies, like, hey, like now this should just be, you should just be able to do this significantly faster, and not necessarily like buzz me about
hit me with a buzzword bomb. But it definitely feels like we're still early innings in some ways. It's lost a little bit of its luster, but I think it'll get better. And as the tech gets better, I think people will have more use cases, and the use cases will get refined.
100%. No, I agree. I think, but the excitement was definitely way like early this year. I mean, even RSA, I mean, it was like, that's why I told you this time around, like literally, identity and other areas where like real conversations have been having more. But like, early this year, last year, I mean, all the excitement was about AI. But I think now, it's just table stakes. Like at this point, you have to be using it to optimize both internal as well as customer facing processes. So it's really interesting.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to ask you a few questions about the shared responsibility model around security. So I don't know if you've spent much time in this, but I think it's becoming very clear to me that it's just super broken. Like if you look at the Snowflake breach and sort of like, I think is like very kind of telling and like shine a light on, I think what's broken there is there's a lot of tools that are provided by the vendors. They're not always used by customer. Like, what does that mean? Like, do you have any perspective on the shared responsibility model around security, and like, how are you thinking about it?
Yeah. I guess maybe you might also want to be give me more specific, because obviously there's so many, but like I think a lot about the shared responsibility in the cloud side of things, CSPs versus like developers but it could be more ITs and more security.
I guess where I'm going on, it's more from the IT and security side. Where I'm poking at specifically is like, I think vendors in particular have been, just to make a point here that's been made 1,000 times, is like the SSO tax. SSO is clearly a best practice from a security perspective, but many times vendors charge for it.
Sure.
And so how do we just get to a point where, vendors all have best practice implementations of security features, and there's a consistent way that they are or are not being charged for it? I'm leading the witness here. I'm telling you what I want to see in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's it's a very tricky balance, and this is very common. I was talking to a company in the SaaS security space yesterday, and I think this is also where you see a bit of that balance of like, okay, like what should you expect of Microsoft and Salesforce of the world relative to what you have to do, right? And I was really having this good conversation yesterday on the SSPM category. This is also SaaS security posture management. I think that's one area where we've seen this tricky balance of like, what's the responsibility of the IaaS PaaS vendor relative to you as an individual. But I think,
is that because do those vendors bring that up like very like front and center as a part of their products because it's telling you a lot about the security of the SaaS products?
A lot of the time it's loopholes internally, and that's what's leading to the creation now of this, having the vendors have to do their own part. But I think fundamentally at the end of the day, I think both teams have to own that responsibility on one hand, right? And I think even now we're seeing the blame game between Delta and Salesforce.
I know.
And then
if you saw, did you see that, right? In the news,
So honestly, it's such a tricky balance, right? Because on your end, so you also have some responsibilities on your end as an infrastructure team to make sure you have good standards and protocols in place. And then you bring in your security vendor, and these are the clear lines of responsibility you expect from them. But yeah, it's a very tricky one. I don't think it's I don't know if I have the perfect answer, because it's such a tricky line.
I don't even have the right questions for you. It's something that's been bugging me, and it's something I've been stewing on and really trying to
How do you guys think about that? Because like shadow IT or shadow apps is like one problem you probably try to solve, and you probably have costs. There's probably kind of a tricky balance there too.
I mean, I think about it more from the perspective of what are the tools and features that as a platform that is used by a company that has, and the platform has major security implications, either because it's hosting data or it's providing some security outcome for a business. How do those tools themselves give customers the right security features and capabilities to keep their organization secure, and not obfuscate or make it hard to use those features? So we think a lot. And here's a great example. We only support SSO login into Conductor One because that makes it so, we don't have to deal with credentialing users, recovery, any of those types of use cases. We've delegated that to an IDP, whether that's, One Login or Okta or Azure or whatever the case might be. So I think those are that's illustrative of a way that you can approach that. But, I'd love to see, for example, any company that has security, like major security implications. So if you're not a whiteboarding SaaS tool or something, you have customer data or you have serious security implications of your product.
Right.
Everyone should have SSO. Everyone should support provisioning and deprovisioning. Everyone should support IP restrictions, sensitive data access, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a very, very important question. And some of this is also where you have some of your compliance guys.
Yeah, totally.
Like they're also meant to help you. So it's a very tricky balance, but I think you're up to something there as like, this is something more people should be talking about and the industry should cry for.
I want to see like a vendor checklist of like, you have to have all these. Francis, it's
amazing,
you, man.
It's so nice stuff to see you.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much for having me. So amazing. Awesome.
Thanks for tuning in. This episode of All Aboard is brought to you by the team at Conductor One. We'd love to hear your feedback. Send us a message at allaboard@conductor1.com. Till next time.